to ensure that we meet fiscal targets over time. You know, to amplify what the minister had said, one of the ambitions of any particular budget is not just the financial numbers, but what the budget intends to do, what the budget intends to accomplish. And naturally, at least so far, a lot of the attention has been on the headline story regarding the tax increases. I think it's important that the members of the press and the public realize that there are significant other elements that the budget is seeking to do. Within the budget, there are significant measures for easing doing business in the country. We talked to simplified processes for starting businesses. There's a provision in the budget for provisional licenses for people who are opening a business but going through the regulatory process to be able to actually get a provisional license and open their business even while the licensing process is being completed. The government is making good on its $25 million commitment to small businesses by putting $5.5 million in the budget this year that will be specifically targeted at small and medium-sized businesses, getting the cash in the hands of the entrepreneurs to make it work. And there will be an element of that that is targeted specifically to youth and targeted specifically to poor and marginalized communities and in smaller family island communities, so to ensure that the funds are distributed in a targeted way. What we're doing is also about an economic diversification. Within the budget context, we're going to start projects around the digital economy and the blue economy. And these were highlighted in the budget presentation. And the notion around the digital economy writ large is to make sure that the country advances substantially and catches up with the rest of the world in its utilization of digital technology, both inside government and inside the private sector. And of course, making good on the blue economy that the minister highlighted yesterday. And the blue economy really speaks to the sea. And we in the Bahamas have the advantage of having more sea than any other country in the region. And of course, all of the attendant elements that come out of the sea. The fishery stock, the salt mining possibilities, and of course, the aragonite story. And the idea is to really do a dispassionate and full empirical analysis to see what opportunities exist for these elements in an environmentally sustainable way. A key element of what we want to talk about is how the education and training moves forward and substantial increases in the budget to sustain education and training, including free scholarships for all BTVI students and a range of programs in there. So to support the getting persons ready to be able to take advantage of the opportunities in the economy around construction and around the trades. A key part of the initiative as well, and when we look at the context of why it is that we have to make the tax adjustments, is around restoring sound macroeconomic environment. The minister spoke at that, so I won't go into it, but a key part of what needs to happen is in order for the country to flourish over the medium and long term, is you need to have a sound and stable fiscal environment. Already the question has been asked to myself, the minister, and others, well, why now? Why is it that you're doing what you're doing now? What about the sacrifices that people are asked to make? What about the money coming out of their pockets? And the question is, yes, there's additional monies coming out of the pocket, but in order to maintain a sound fiscal environment over the medium and long term, these are necessary. The failure to do so, the continued debt and deficits invariably lead to a situation where we have currency devaluation. And we've seen examples of this. This isn't theory. This is practice. We've seen examples. We know of examples of this. And when your currency devalues, then all of your assets and all of your earnings depreciate right along with it. So it's doing the things that are necessary in the short term to ensure that we have a sound macro environment in the long term. And key to that, actually, is around fiscal discipline and enshrining it in the law. And you will hear more conversation about this as the government tables its fiscal responsibility legislation that will set the parameters for debt, for deficits, and actually require governments to have an articulated and public plan, and also to have a fiscal council in place, which is an independent body that will actually comment on and critique what the government is doing. The third point is near and dear to me and is about getting government right. A part of the medium-term, long-term cost management is to make use of readily available digital technologies. We all travel, we all in our day know how much we could do online, how much we could do on our phones. And the key to actually getting to an efficient government is the investments that are being made in what we call the digital Bahamas. And so we're going to start that with specific emphasis in the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education. But the notion is that we're going to use this to catapult the Bahamas, both in the private sector and the public sector, to the point where we represent, the minister's ambition is that we should be best in region, which I think is very ambitious, but he doesn't want us to stop at being best in region. He wants us to ensure that we become best in the world. And it is an achievable objective, and we will start to work hard towards it. And underlying all of that, what we're doing is we're enhancing the revenue administration. The tax increases in the budget do not only come from the new tax, but come from the demand placed on us in the public service to become better stewards of the existing taxes, to get more yield out of the taxes that are in the books. And so we targeted $80 million for a special revenue enhancement unit that they will be mandated to collect over and above what the typical run rates are, particularly in the areas of customs collection and real property tax. Because we're not satisfied that we are getting the appropriate yield in those existing tax areas. And in order for us to meet our budget targets, we will have to collect substantial more of those taxes that are in the books. Underlying all of that will be the reform efforts in the Ministry of Finance, where we will be putting in place a new debt management unit, and we'll be substantially enhancing the team's analytical capabilities and skill sets to ensure that we get the information, we analyze the information, to ensure that we can have better informed macro and fiscal policy going forward. I won't spend a lot of time on the next slide, but simply to say that a key component of what you see in the budget is around in the green Bahamas. We live in a country that's blessed with sun and blessed with you wouldn't think so from the recent few weeks, but we do live in a sunny country. And so a lot of what you see in the budget is geared around enhancing the capacity for solar, with at least one solar demonstration project in the Family Island, where in a particular community, we will look to take a substantial electricity generation via solar farm. We're going to implement a LED street lighting project that will, within the next 3 to 4 years, we imagine, change out every street light in the Bahamas to an LED light and save 60% or more of the cost of generating electricity just for street lighting. In certain Family Islands, we'll go to solar lights so that they can come off the grid altogether. And the lights will carry a battery backup. So they'll collect the sun in the day and use the battery backup in the night for light. And of course, with vehicles, there is this considered effort to incentivize small fuel efficient vehicles by lowering the duty rates there and by dropping the rates on hybrids and electrical cars under $50,000 down to 10%. So the idea is we want to encourage and incentivize Bahamians to get efficient vehicles go forward. A part of again, one of the questions asked of us is, well, if you raise the VAT, then why you lower it on these other things? And I think it's a good question, and so I can preempt that question that will come up. And by saying the government had committed already to reducing and eliminating VAT on the breadbasket items. Given the necessity of the fiscal situation to raise the VAT, it made it even more incumbent to accelerate giving the VAT relief on core essential items, including the breadbasket items, as well as for medicines, as well as for residential property insurance, and for electricity and water for the most poorest and most vulnerable. There are duty concessions throughout the budget on other food products, so we've lowered the duty on other food products, and we'll say a little bit more about that as we go through the month. The tax concessions in the Oval Hill community will start this year, and eventually that will expand to other marginalized communities in a way to incentivize those communities and revitalize those communities. And of course, there will be duty relief on clothing and shoes and apparel for licensed retailers. And the reason that is, as opposed to a blanket duty-free exemption on clothing, is we want to encourage the local retailers, whether you're a small retailer or a large retailer, as long as you have a business license, we want to encourage those persons. So they will have to get licensed, and they will have to demonstrate they're prepared to pass on the savings to customers. Move forward. As far as the tax relief, we're extending the first-time homeowners stamp tax exemption. And of course, that is to continue the existing policy to ensure that persons get an exemption on their first home, to encourage that. We extended the business license concessional rate to small hotels. And what that does is, presently, there was an arrangement whereby hotels over $400 million in turnover was able to benefit from a lower business license regime. That has now been dropped to all hotels that have 10 rooms or more, so to ensure that Bahamian-owned hotels get advantage of that particular concession. And of course, there are tax concessions for all charitable activities that wasn't there before. The minister spoke at length about the fiscal pressures that the country faced. And those are considerable. And he spoke about the key elements, so I won't go into that, the actual numbers. He spoke to those. except to say that a key part of the exercise we undertook, and you will see it in your budget documents, is making sure we do something called right budgeting. If you look at Annex 3 in your budget document, you will see we gave examples of that, whereby there were underfunded items for known commitments. And so there was an express policy dictate that we will discontinue that. The net effect of that, though, is that we realized we were underfunding key budget commitments, contracts already signed by some $70 million. And so just by right budgeting, that created a considerable boost up in our financial requirements. We are looking to establish a sinking fund. We have a sinking fund arrangements, but we are looking to actually widen that. And what a sinking fund does is that as the government, for instance, went out and did the $750 million bond, in years past, the interest on that would be paid. But then when it comes time to make the principal payment in year 7, 8, or 9 of a 10-year bond, then the government has to go out and borrow the entire sum, again, to pay it off. A sinking fund requires the government to start to set aside money, so when that comes due, you don't have to roll over the bond and continue down the debt road. And of course, we already discussed the key part is that our pension reform. By some estimates, we have a pension time bomb coming in a few years of over $3 billion it is? $3 billion. And so a key exercise during this current fiscal year is to meet with all of the union stakeholders, other key stakeholders, and come up with a plan to address what will be a very, very expensive undertaking, but to make sure we do so in a judicious way. You know, for fiscal options, because the question always is, well, what could you do and what should you do? There are a couple of options that the government and we at the Ministry of Finance could have considered as to how to address this, what we know to be about a $400 million a year gap. And that's, again, just looking at what our known commitments are. That's looking at how we address the arrears, because those arrears have to be paid. Through the exercise, we realized we had about a $400 million gap. This was after we all sat down and we went through cutting the budget over and over and over to try to see how we can realistically bring the number down. And we were left with a substantial gap. So there are several options that the government could look at, we in the Ministry of Finance could look at. We could look at cutting the discretionary spending. We could continue to borrow. We could continue the under-budgeting exercise that would have done, whereby we would have come to Parliament with a book that had the right numbers, but the numbers would be actually understating the reality. Or we can enhance the revenue yield. And so let's go through those a little bit. So this just gives you an idea of what our budget looks like. About 30% of it is personal emoluments and allowances. About 15.4% is subventions to state-owned enterprises. Those are things, the Public Health Authority is the most significant one. But all of the subventions and subsidies we give to public entities. The interest of debt is about 15% of budget. And so that leaves about 40% of budget for everything else. Of that 40%, we have to include in that the $154 million in the arrears that are looking to be settled this year, as well as $70 million in the right budgeting exercise. So as a thought exercise, if you're faced with this, where do you cut? Because if you cut in the discretionary element, that's everything, that's supplies, that's contracts, that's all of those things. And so if you're going to cut those, then the people who you have employed have nothing to work with. So the other alternative is, well, you could look to cut the people. But to get to $400 million worth in cutting staff, you're talking several thousand staff members that you have to send home tomorrow. Because the thing about the $400 million gap is that I hear a lot of ideas being bandied about, but that gap is due today. So whatever exercises that we do over the midterm, we still have that reality to pay today. So the options for cutting discretionary spending outside of laying off mass numbers of people are limited. Go forward. So one of the key points I want to point out is that the other option is to look to borrow more. And I put this slide up because it's a very telling slide. As Minister said, if you just look on year, the growth in spending on just interest payment. In 2011-12, it was just under $200 million. For this budget period, it's going to be, I think, $381 million in this budget period. So $381 million of what we collect is going to interest payment. If we decide we're going to borrow another $400 million, well, I mean, we have an existing deficit now even within this budget, so let's say $600 million, because we're just going to borrow. What do we think is going to happen to that line in the next budget period? And this is the debt trap that governments face. They don't want to have to tax. There's very little room to cut, so they borrow. And as they borrow, the interest rates keep spiraling, and you see an example in this particular fiscal year that the activities and the sharp borrowing that had to happen during this fiscal period to deal with the arrears of the past administration and deal with the current elements led to a spike in this budget year. And the more we borrow, the larger that spike goes up. Go forward. Of course, we could continue the under-budgeting. We could ignore the fiscal problem. We can play tricks. We can take the budget from this year and use to pay off last year's bill. We could continue to give IOUs to NIB and Water and Sewage and BEC. We can tell vendors to keep calling into the office to try to figure out when they get paid. And we could continue that on. Now, for small vendors, this is unconscionable. Because as the minister pointed out, we have lunch vendors who haven't been paid for months. We have any number of small contractors who figure out how to get paid. And the truth of the matter is there's no more money in the budget to pay them. Because the monies that were allocated during this fiscal period went to pay off last year's bills. Why? Because they were under budgeted. That's the budget game that had been played. Now, for the big entities, NIB, well, NIB is a government entity. But in this budget alone, well, in that $360 million arrears, about $100 million of that is to NIB. And NIB is in a position where it's cash strapped, where it has its own obligations to make, where you see that it has to raise its revenue. So it's whatever we do owing money to NIB, we're crippling them from a cash flow standpoint. We owe, between BEC and Water and Sewage, we owe over $25 million. Arrears built up over years. Now, when you don't pay BPL and when you don't pay Water and Sewage, again, it cripples their cash flow and they can't make the investments in the plant to keep the lights on. So you pay them the money, they have the money to do the maintenance, they have the money to get the plants. So so again, we could continue that on, and you only can cripple other entities or you run small businesses out of business. Okay. So it led us to the point that given all of that in the $400 million gap, the inevitable conclusion is that we have to close this gap and we have to close it correctly. We have to close it quickly. At the same time, the structural reforms need to continue. So we still need to make sure that the state-owned enterprises operate properly. We still have to contain the growth of government expenditure. We still have to become more efficient. We still have to do all of those things. But we have to do so in a way. But even while we make those medium-term adjustments, the $400 million is due today. And so hence the decision in the base of all this is that we have to raise the revenue. We have to raise the taxes. Go forward. I'm sorry, that's right. So, but recognizing that an element of this is related to arrears, the policy announced by the government is that we don't want the monies raised for the arrears to be fueled into future spending. So the 3-year plan is to pay down the arrears, and as the arrears are paid down, the monies that were utilized for the arrears portion of the pay down is to be given back to the consumers. And by announcing that, I think the government has committed to that course of action because the consumers in the future budgets will be, rightly so, looking for the government to keep true to its commitment. So the move to 12% is a move, and for the time being, it is a permanent move in the VAT. However, underlying that is that as the payments on the arrears come down, the government will start to make the corresponding cut down in customs and in excise and other taxes in order to give back that amount of money to the Bahamian community. Now, the net effect of that, go forward, is it puts us in line with the mandates that would be given to the government under the fiscal responsibility legislation. Not if, because I know my minister will not accept the word if. When we do what we say that we are going to do, and when we in the Ministry of Finance and my government colleagues do what we need to do to collect additional revenues from the revenues that exist, it will enable the government to meet the fiscal targets set out in the financial fiscal responsibility legislation and get the government down towards a balanced budget, if not a surplus, by the year 2021. And that's not only, and in so doing, what we do is we actually position the country for medium and long-term growth. And so that's the government's stated commitment as articulated, and that is what we're aiming towards. The net effect of that also will be to reduce our debt to GDP ratio down from 57.2%, where it is today, down to 52.1% tomorrow and create a much more healthy, vibrant country. And in so doing, permit the government to respond to any external shock, because we still live in a hurricane zone, we still have the unknown, there still could be a recession in the US. When you are able to manage your fiscal responsibilities, when bad times happen, you have the headroom to be able to respond. So with that, I close my presentation and we open the floor to questions. Okay, go ahead, yeah, take the questions.
A central bank said a few weeks ago that 50% of Canadians can't make ends meet. When you see a report like that, why did the government ultimately decide that, as opposed to a more progressive form of revenue generation, increasing the tax rates to 12% was necessary? What is it about the current state of the economy that convinced the government that poorer Bahamians in particular could meet that burden?
All right. The answer to that is we recognize that any tax increase will have a particularly strong impact on the poor Bahamians. Hence, the move within the context to remove the VAT on bread basket items, to drop the duty on a lot of basic food stuff outside of the VAT elimination, to address the issue around electricity, the VAT relief on electricity, the VAT relief on water. When any government is faced with this predicament where they have to increase taxes, a part of the thinking goes in how do you protect the most vulnerable in those instances? And that is why, that is part of the package. It became even more incumbent upon the policymakers to actually ensure that there are measures in there that look at VAT on critical things like medicine, on food and the like. So that really informs what we do. As far as the broader tax question, we didn't mention this morning, but was mentioned yesterday, is that there is a tax committee that's looking at alternative forms of taxation for the Bahamas. Any move to any sort of different type of tax to do it properly takes time. So the minister's mandated that committee does its work and report within this fiscal period, and then that then informs the kind of discussions we can have around alternative forms of taxation.
If I may just add to that, we recognize that the additional 4.5% of value-added tax will represent a significant cost to the average Bahamian family, in particular those who are most vulnerable. And so, as the Financial Secretary indicated, we have put in place measures directly aimed at that group of people who will be most affected by this increase. In addition to that, we have also increased the social services budget by almost $4 million to try and pick up some of the slack for those who may find themselves still in a difficult and vulnerable position. But the reality is that we all live in one Bahamas, and we all have a responsibility to ensure that the Bahamas as a whole is able to go forward in a sustained way and in a responsible way. And so it does mean that some of us who are able to afford will find that we are paying more. As a percentage of income, as compared to the cost of living, you will find that there is more equity in what this plan actually presents. In that, when you consider all of the concessions that are being given to the most vulnerable, which will help to maintain their current standard, or in some cases actually improve their standard and their percentage of tax to income, those who can afford a little bit more may find that their effective tax rate may be coming up a little bit to compensate. And so we believe that we've tried to do the best we can to balance this increase in tax versus making sure that there are provisions to counter the effect on the most vulnerable communities. And I believe that when you look at the Over the Hill initiative in particular, you see the kinds of support that we are trying to provide, and direct intervention that we are trying to provide to help to lift these communities and to ensure that they have opportunities equal to those who might be able to afford more.
Now, the opposition has suggested government does not know what it's doing with these, with this new budget. It's a clear indication that government does not know what it's doing, and it suggests that this new budget will set the country back into a recession. What are your thoughts on that? And are there any chances of government reducing the 12% after consultation with the Chamber of Commerce? Because I know the business community has been also expressing concern.
So my first reaction to that is that, you know, it is laughable that an opposition that oversaw a massive run-up in debt over the last 5 years would have the nerve, the gall, to stand before the Bahamian people to talk about this current government that is taking the very deliberate and difficult decision to try and fix this runaway train that we've had for the last 5 years, to talk about we don't know what we're doing. The fact of the matter is that they have oversaw and run up in the payroll, just the wages of the government, by $266 million in the last 5 years. They have run up expenditures to over $1 billion, real cost, recurrent cost, that the Bahamian people have to pay. Very irresponsible spending. In the last year alone, you know the number of people who have been sold a dream, been given 3-month contracts and 6-month contracts to try to win an election. And I'm sorry, that's basically what it boils down to. That we now have to pay. And you hear the crocodile tears about, oh, you're letting people go, when they know full well what they did to try and deceive the Bahamian people. And so when I hear them talk about we don't know what we're doing, the fact of the matter is they've left us with very limited options about how to address this structural problem that we have. Very little options. And I suspect that in moments of truth and clarity, they will tell you that the reality is that the issues that we face as a country are very challenging. We are faced with not only internal pressure, but external pressure. And we have to face that. Otherwise, as the Financial Secretary says, we kick that can down the road again, and we leave it for our children to pay. The only problem is the cost to them will be significantly more than what we are faced with today. I don't know about you, I have children, and I want them to grow up in the Bahamas that has a better opportunity than I had. I want them to be able to live their dreams in safety, in relative stability. And we have an obligation as a government, as a people, to ensure that there is a stable Bahamas, a safe Bahamas, a progressive Bahamas for them to inherit. And if that means that I don't know what I'm doing, then God help me. Because I know one thing, not acting is not an option.
Minister Turnquist, a lot of talk has been delivered from your administration as it relates to the Overhill community. We know that Family Island residents are suffering, especially residents on Grand Bahama, since the ravaging hurricanes in 2004. What is being done from the F&M administration's perspective to ensure that they don't suffer under this hike in VAT? Are there going to be any employment pushes from the government, or are we expecting them to pull from the social services increase of $4 million?
So, again, a multi-level approach to this issue. The Family Island Encouragement Act, Encouragement Act has been renewed, which gives Family Islands certain advantages with respect to concessions from taxes. But in addition to that, and Grand Bahama, as you mentioned, is obviously very special to me in that it's where I represent. We recognize that that economy has been suffering for many years, and really all the way from 2004 with the 2 hurricanes that hit us back to back. We have not recovered since then. And of course, Hurricane Matthew made matters worse, taking out our major tourism infrastructure. We are working very hard to get that project back in operation. It is a complex negotiation. It involves 4 parties. It involves airlift and the cost. The government is of the view that we want to minimize our subsidy in the tourism industry. We believe that we have reached that point in our development of this industry where we need to start scaling back what we contribute as Bahamians to the success of those industries. And while we recognize that there is continued need for promotion and marketing support and the like, we want to start to rationalize. And so this is a complex discussion that's going on. It is progressing. We believe that we have agreed most of the major points with respect to that project, and we're hoping for a very quick resolution and completion. I don't want to give a timeline on that because it is a negotiation, and so there is back and forth going on. But the Grand Bahamians can be assured that we are focused on that and we are working very hard to deliver it. The good news is that the West End project is really, really, really close, and I'm much more comfortable in saying that that one will be completed, if not by the end of, in next month, because it is already 31st. In June, that will be completed, and that is going to be a significant development on the west end of Grand Bahama. And we're looking forward to the contributions that will make to employment and to turning that economy around. But we're working on a number of initiatives for Grand Bahama. While it is very difficult at the moment, I am confident that we're going to see a turnaround relatively soon. And I know that 2019, or later half of 2018, 2019, is going to be much better for the economy of Grand Bahama.
Gaming house operators could see a hike in taxes on their revenue as high as 50%. Twofold question for you. Is this not almost a partnership with the government? If they're making earnings and you're taking 50%, is that not considered somewhat of a partnership? And also speaking with the Gaming Association yesterday, their CEO is concerned that there's racial profiling from the government, that they don't want to see the black demographic in the Bahamas succeed. Could you answer those two questions for me, please?
Last time I looked in the mirror, I'm a black man. So I don't know how I'm going to racially profile my own people. So I'll leave that there. With respect to the industry itself, as you all know, the Bahamian people voted a particular way with respect to this industry. Nonetheless, it was allowed to proceed. But it was allowed to proceed in a way that the Bahamian people were given the short end of the stick, if you will. In other regions, the amount of tax that is generated from the gaming industry is as much as 80%. We have tried to strike a balance to be fair to them and to be fair to the Bahamian people. There is a call, for instance, for us to establish a national lottery. We don't necessarily want to get into that business, but we recognize that it is a valuable business that has the ability to generate revenue for the Bahamian people such that we can invest in cultural activities and sporting activities and education. The fact of the matter is that to date, the wealth has been accumulating in the hands of a few people. We believe, given the effects that gambling has had on societies, particularly vulnerable family islands, that it is only fair that they pay their fair share and contribute to the social well-being of the Bahamas as much as the Bahamian people have empowered them. We're not targeting them or trying to destroy them, but what we are saying is that you have to make a social contribution, particularly to those communities that you are pulling so much from. And I think it's only fair.
Aside from the opposition, chamber officials and residents have expressed concern about this VAT hike. So again, is government considering reducing the 12% figure, or is it staunch in the 12%?
You know, we're always open to our industry partners. We have had conversations with the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants president. We've had conversations with the Chamber of Commerce, informal conversations, about what our thinking was. And I don't remember if we told them what the rate was or not, but we've had formal conversations about where we're heading. So it isn't as if we are not including our partners. We understand how important it is for them as primary stakeholders in this to be brought along. We are meeting with the Chamber of Commerce this afternoon, as a matter of fact, to have a transparent briefing with them about where we are and why we have taken the decisions that we've taken. The 12% is the rate that we have settled upon. And I want you to understand, and the Bahamian people to understand, that we did not settle on that rate arbitrarily. We thought about this. We ran models to determine what would happen if we took the rate to 9% or 10%. And ultimately, we decided on the 12% rate because it gives us the best opportunity to get through this period of consolidation as quickly as possible and begin to reduce the pain on the Bahamian people. And so you know, again, we understand the complexity of the issue. We understand the effects that this can have on individual families, and we've tried to mitigate as best we can. But again, accepting the fact that for all of us, there's sacrifice that is necessary. But again, you know, this is what happens when you live beyond your means. At some point, you got to pay. And unfortunately for us, it falls on us. No joy in this. Trust me, I got to pay the 12% too. And I work for the government now, so my salary is fixed. so there's no joy in this. But I understand that I have a commitment and I have a responsibility to our country as a whole. And so I am going to do what I have to do to adjust my budget to account for whatever the increase may be.
Morning, Minister. I have three questions that I want to ask in one, if you could probably summarize. Did the 12% increase in VAT, did any of those models come from information from VAT percentages throughout the region, other countries? Did the government look at how other countries use their VAT program with 12%, because I know there's some 15% in some regional countries as well? Also, will attrition and the letting go or letting retirees leave the public service help in any way for the budget, for the increase, or any more monies to be settled for the budget? And also, I want you to tell me whether or not, because Bahamians are asking, if VAT is going up, will salaries be going up in the public services soon? And that got some hand clapping.
I'm sure you did. I'd like a raise too, but that ain't gonna happen. So yes, we did do benchmarking with respect to the region as to where our VAT rate may end up in comparison to what's happening in the region. And we see rates anywhere. I think the lowest rate that we saw in our comparable states is 12.5%. And they went all the way up to, I think it's 21% or something. So ours, even though it's increased, it is still below, well below the regional average. And we do not see any further increases in this rate anytime in the near future. So we're fairly comfortable that this is the rate that is best for us and that we will be able to work with well into the future. With respect to retirees, the government has made a decision that it will allow retirees to retire and to make room for young people to come into the system, to be trained and to be able to take over some of the responsibilities that are being filled by these persons. As a part of that, we know that there is a level of financial management and personal financial planning that needs to be done. We will be engaging in those kinds of exercises within the public service because, again, it is unfair to the younger people for them to be held back because people have not managed their circumstances as well as they might have if they had more information. And so we want to help with that process. We want to ensure that we give our retirees a comfortable standard of living once they are in fact retired. But we want to make sure that we allow young people an opportunity to come into the system because not only do they bring a freshness, but they bring new ideas and they're more open to change. We are looking at that, and we'll certainly continue with that process. With respect to salaries, I have heard the cries for increases in minimum wage myself. And, you know, the minimum wage, and I'm probably going to get in trouble here, but when you increase the wage, the minimum wage, there's a cost to that. A lot of people believe that when they get an increase in a wage, that they have actually got an effective increase. But the truth of the matter is, if you increase wages in one sector, the business is going to compensate for that, which means they're going to increase the cost of the product or the service that they deliver. That means the consumer who is buying that cost of goods or service, they're going to have to spend more. And then that passes on, because they're going to also demand an increase in wage. Right? And so it just goes through. And so by the time as you account for the increase in wage, less the cost of living increase as a result of businesses are increasing their cost to compensate for that increase in wage, the net amount of the increase is probably negligible. And so while I understand that it is difficult to live on the minimum wage, we have to consider holistically what it means when we say that we want to increase wages. Because the one thing that we do not want to do is to cause businesses to increase their costs, thereby increasing the cost of living overall for everybody, and nor do we want them to fire people because they cannot afford to pay the wages.
You know, the reality is that we faced an immediate financing gap. This was the point that we went through when we looked at all of the key known commitments. And even if you back out any new spend, any new project spend, you still left with a deficit or a hole that's $500, $600 million. The current budget calls for to move the deficit down to $237 million is the target deficit, of about 1.8% of GDP. So if you added back in that deficit to the hole, you had a $637 million hole that we had to accommodate. If we had moved the VAT up to, say, 8%, from 7.5%, we may have earned another $50 million. Okay, so you still got a big hole. And you move the VAT up to 9%, okay, you shrink the hole, but the hole is still $300 million. The options were, and this is what I did through the presentation, we had several options. So let's say we had the $400 million hole that we have now today, but we could have borrowed again. So we could have gone and to come to Parliament with a bill for $637 million worth of borrowing. And I would like to see in the headlines if we had done that, right? And more than just the headlines, more than just the reactions to that, it goes back to the interest rate table that I showed. If we went and bought another $638 million, then now next year, you go from $381 million with interest financing to the $450 million. And then that's more money. So the problem is, what you do, you kick the can down the road. Borrowing excessively only makes the problem down the road. The second option is we could have continued a false budget. We could have brought in, the good thing about paper is to sit down and let you write anything on it. So we could have carved the budget to say we only could run a $100 million deficit, and both Minister and I would sleep a lot better, at least in the short term. But guess what? Again, another 2 or 3 years, bills ain't getting paid. So the reality is that these are the stark choices that you have. Or, as we discussed, we could have sent almost 6,000, 7,000 people. Even if that was done, you create an economic, you take all those salaries out of the economy, you put all those people on social welfare, and you take all that consumption out, and you end up slowing down the economy to negate whatever budget savings you had. So what I'd like to impress upon the Bahamian people, as the minister said, is that these decisions aren't taken tritely. And they're taken very holistically, looking at all of the implications. But the imperative to act is that if you take the tough decision today, you avoid the catastrophe tomorrow. We don't want to be like neighbor X or neighbor Y. We ain't gonna call names. But we know these stories. So what would then happen is that had the government decided to take the easy road out and just simply delay and kick the can down the road, That might have worked for a while. And then 8 years later, 5 years later, 4 years later, when the currency devalued, everybody would have been saying, why back then didn't they raise the VAT to 12%? And give us the pay and then. So these are the decisions that you have to make. I hope that frames the discussion properly. It's painful, it requires us to dig in our pocket now, but do you want to dig in our pocket now, or we want our children to have a worse standard of living tomorrow?
And just to add to that, to illustrate further to the question that Cleopatra asked earlier, last year, the year before, the government budgeted $100 million as their deficit. $100 million. Again, paper stands still and you can write whatever you want to write on it. You can get to whatever number you want to. The deficit came in at $650 million. And that's without paying all the bills that were due. So again, when you hear the former government, the opposition talk about not having a plan or not being prepared, you remind them that they left us a bill that no Bahamian was prepared for. So now we have to tighten our belts and we have to fix it.
Okay, Minister, I have 3 questions for you.
This is the final question because we're timed out.
I mean, the mic just got to the side of the table, so.
So yeah, be quick.
I'll ask one then, and let my colleagues ask a few. VAT was not the only news that came out of the budget yesterday. There were also a few other fee hikes. If you reach your goal, your strategic 3-year goal, are there any plans to reverse these fee hikes and the VAT increase?
I think when it comes to the fees that have been adjusted, you will find that most of them have not been adjusted for many years and have not reflected the increase in the cost of providing those services. So I don't think that there's any of those fees that are out of line with current day realities. And so I wouldn't expect in terms of fees that there would be any reductions. There may be some eliminations as we look at the overall structure of the revenue of the government as a part of the project that we're doing. Because I have some ideas about some of these colonial taxes, if I may call them that we still collect today. But that has to be done in a more holistic way with data to actually support the decisions that we make.
Gentlemen, I understand the balancing act that the government has to do in terms of, its fiscal responsibilities. How was healthcare factored in, especially when it comes to breadbasket items and healthcare costs, which we know are mounting? We know what the healthcare system looks like in the country. How was that taken into account, especially because breadbasket items in terms of people is subjective in terms of what they want to eat? We haven't seen taxes come down off on fruit and vegetables, that kind of thing.
So you're aware that the Minister of Health is engaged in an active consultation process right now, education campaign, if you will, to sensitize the Bahamian people as to the effect of these healthy lifestyles and some of the bad choices that we make. We do intend to have another look at the bread basket and hopefully adjusting it to have more healthy options included in it. That is a project that is ongoing, and as that basket is changed, if you will, or added to, we will make further adjustments along the way. But it is anticipated that within short order, we will be making some further adjustments, ensuring that there is a healthy options to the basket, so that those who are appreciative of a more holistic lifestyle will have lower cost options. One of the problems that we have as we've gone through the consultations is you'll understand that not only do we have to lower the cost, but we also have to change the mindset of some of our people, because we like the kinds of foods that we eat. And so we have to change do a whole education campaign and change the taste, if you will, of Bahamians in some respects, so that we transition to a more healthy diet.
If I could just add something on the health, it's the point in the budget that the Ministry of Health now has gotten $24 million in capital works to help develop their plan to rebuild their plan to get some of the critical equipment, and they'd like to help improve the delivery of healthcare in the country. And also the government intends in this fiscal year to introduce the catastrophic healthcare coverage, a part of NHI, so that the Bahamians who face dire particular catastrophic care requirement can have those elements covered. And that will be then to help address some of the actual health issues that are being encountered.
And those things, along with the increase in VAT, does that not contribute to mounting healthcare costs for the country itself and for the populace? Just the increasing, with VAT increasing, just healthcare costs will be going up, notwithstanding medication, of course.
No, I think, again, the savings on medicines that the elimination of VAT will result in is going to be a significant savings to the Bahamian people. In respect to the primary health care, which is probably what you're talking about, the public health system is still available, and it is still a very reasonable cost in order to access. We're not eliminating anything. In fact, the investments that the FS talk about will improve the services and the capabilities of the public health system. The catastrophic health care will address the critical needs of persons who find themselves in a situation where they are unable to afford the care that they need, particularly life-saving care, and it will reduce that burden and will allow them to save their dignity without going broke. So I think overall the cost of healthcare will actually come down. Certainly, we don't believe that there should be an increase. And we have included in our budget the provisions with respect to the introduction of this catastrophic health care plan, and as the FS said, with respect to further improvements in the physical infrastructure of the healthcare system.
Royston Jones, Nassau Guardian. One of the challenges you have with an increase in VAT, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, is that as governments become reliant on additional tax revenues or this tax mechanism, it increases over a substantive period. There's no cap been set on VAT. This was one of the things that the former administration was asked. Is there a cap set for VAT, and is there a time frame of this cap at 12% if that's what it ends up being in July?
The only thing that we can guarantee in life is death. But having said that, we believe, and we've set the rate at 12%, because we believe that it will meet the needs of the Bahamas well into the future. We do not see any reason why we will have to increase that rate. In addition to that, when we look across the region, again, this puts us right in line where we think we need to be. It also allows us to balance the budget and to put us in a situation where we can start to pay down some of our debt, as well as to return back to the Bahamian people in tangible terms through reductions in excise and duty and other things, real dollars. So we have no intention for the foreseeable future of having any increases in VAT. I remind you that when the previous government introduced value-added tax, they wanted to come in at as high as 17%. So even in the early days, it was recognized, on their behalf anyway, that 7.5% was low. Now, we believe that there were other ways to do it, but that's another discussion, all right? But we have grown the level of government to where it is, and we have to meet our obligations.
I want to take you back to, and I'm glad you raised the point.
Sorry, FS reminded me. Fiscal responsibility legislation will also build in some caps with respect to the level of government spending and the growth in spending from year to year. And that cap is tied to the increase in GDP. So we can't, if successive governments comply with the fiscal responsibility rule, they will be constrained in the way that they can increase expenditures from one year to the next. And that in itself will serve as a control, if you will, on the government's willingness or need to increase further the value-added tax rate.
I'm glad you raised that point, and I want to take you back to some statements you made in November 2013 when VAT was going to be introduced at that rate of 7.5%. And you compared it to the country would be jumping off a cliff if it implements VAT. You mentioned that we don't want to be like, and this is a quote, we don't want to be like Barbados, we don't want to be like Grenada, we don't want to be like Haiti, we don't want to be like any of those countries. They're crying about VAT, St. Lucia is crying about VAT. We don't want to be like that. We are a prosperous nation. We have a lot to protect, so let's be careful. We don't have to follow the crowd. Everyone is jumping off the cliff. That doesn't mean we have to jump off the cliff. We can chart our own territory. Fast forward, 2018, you're introducing VAT Tower Month, if you look at it, at 5.5% yourself. How does the people trust the government when it makes these sort of statements in opposition, but then tries to justify it on the basis that you have?
So if you look at the situation in 2012, or 2015 when that was done, compared to where we are today, we are in totally different positions. Back in 2012, we were coming out of a recession, deep recession, and there was real opportunity for us up until about 2012. Growth. The government of the day had the opportunity then to start to roll back some of the costs that had been accumulated in government to cushion the ramp-up in expenditure that was done to offset the effects of that recession. Instead, they held on to those increases and increased them even further. As I said earlier, the payroll went up 266 million just in that period. The sensible thing to have done at that time was to start to roll back the cushions or the incentives that had been given to account for that 2008-2010 recession, and start to bring the government back down to a more reasonable and usual normal level. But we didn't do that. We took the level that we raised it to and added to it. And as a result of it, we are where we are. So it's really not apples to apples when you make that statement. I made that statement at the time because I believed, as I do today, that there was opportunities for the government to do the right thing and bring the cost of government down. As we would have said yesterday and as we say today, in this period, we are in a relatively modest growth period. And so we are taking the opportunity to start to bring our payroll down. We're starting to shrink the size and the cost of government. But at the same time, we have an immediacy with respect to the arrears that we have and the size of the government today. And so we have to take corrective measures, but we have to take them in a way that does not create external or internal shock, that we do not force the economy into recession, but we take prudent steps to start to bring this thing back down to where it is a manageable government while still providing the services and the support that the community and the country needs and deserves.
With all due respect, did the F&M in that case vote against VAT because it was the right timing? Did it vote against VAT on the basis, did you vote against VAT on the basis that it was not the right timing for VAT and not that you didn't believe in it?
At the time, I voted no against VAT, as I just said, and I'm not sure if I'm being unclear, but as I mentioned, at the time I voted against VAT value-added tax, I believed that when you looked at the increased spending that had been done to buffer the country from the effects of the recession, that we ought to have used that opportunity to roll back those increases and bring the government back to a more sensible and